Welcome back to our Bible study in our virtual third floor TV lounge here. Once again, I look forward to the time when I'll be able to join you on the comfy couches and the nice chairs, and we'll be able to be together in a sort of close setting. But for right now, we're still social distancing and we're still keeping sort of one curt length apart. Remember, I'm 6 feet tall. I'm actually 6'2". So if you're as far away from me as I am tall, then we're safe as long as we're wearing our masks and everything else. So I look forward to the day when we can get together as a group. But for now, I want to remind you that I can come and visit you one-on-one, again, as long as we're one curt length away and I'm wearing my mask and all of that sort of safe stuff. And I've been keeping myself pretty safe along the way. About the only time I'm really exposed to many people would be grocery stores, grocery shopping, and I try to be in and out, always wear my mask and wash my hands. And otherwise, I have one or two friends that I get together with who also only ever get together with me to have dinner outside at different places. It's quite nice outside. So if you get a chance to sit outside and can do so once again safely away from people, please do so. But it is quite nice. September is shaping up to be a nice month. So I do hope you'll get a chance to walk the trail or to go and sit outside in the gazebo or do other nice things like that. If you have a patio or deck that you can sit outside on, please do that. If you're in assisted living and you don't have the patio or deck, you can actually go outside in other areas around the building and take advantage of the wonderful weather that we're having today. As I'm making this video, it's a bright sunny sky, there's a cool breeze, and it's not too hot. And last night I was able to leave my windows open and get a fresh breeze and sort of blow out all of the sort of the hot stuffiness that had accumulated, especially in the upstairs. See, this is our third floor TV lounge in the background that you're seeing me, but I'm actually on the third floor of my townhouse as well. So in a sense, I feel like I'm part of the way to being back with you, but the third floor in my townhouse heats up during the day when it's a hot day. So I look forward to the time when it's cooler and stays cooler throughout the day and doesn't require me to move to another part of the house during the afternoon and early evening times, because my computer is up here and that's why I'm talking to you from here. But we may have the cat jump up and join us again, because as I am making this video, the cat thinks it's dinner time, and it probably is close to dinner time for the cat. So if you see a tail swishing, or if he jumps up here and does things, don't be surprised. I have a couple of short videos that I'm going to intersperse into my discussion today, one on Noah, and if we get far enough, one on the Tower of Babel. We may save the Tower of Babel for next time, but it just depends on how much time we have. I want to be cognizant of your time and not go too far over the 45-minute mark or so, because I know backsides get tired and we get tired of watching. So I will try to be aware of that for your sake. Our typical Bible studies usually lasted about 45 to 50 minutes. Once again, if you would like a visit from me, please either find out from Melissa how to call me, or ask Melissa to send me a text message and I will give you a call. That might actually be an easier way to do it, but whatever works, we'll do our best and see what we can do. I do have a lot of spam callers on my telephone, and sometimes it gets a little bit tricky to know what's a legitimate phone number and what's not. So if you try to call me and I don't call you back right away, I apologize. Your number may have been blocked and not through any necessary action of mine. In that case, if I don't call you back rather soon, again, reach out to Melissa and see if she can send me a message, or get in touch with someone there and see if they can get me a message so I can reach out directly to you. But we were finishing up the story of Cain and Abel last time. We're still in the book of Genesis, and we are up to chapter 6. And there's a weirdness in chapter 6 where we started. And I don't want to go too far into this because it is a little bit strange. And my commentary even says that it's strange. The book that I'm going to read from for this section here is the it disappeared. New Interpreter's Bible. There we are, New Interpreter's Bible. It's a 12-volume set and has commentary as well as reflections, as well as the text in both the New International Version and the New Revised Standard Version. And at the end of the Cain and Abel story, we have the genealogy, the sort of all the begats listing from Abraham, from Adam. Abraham's next. Don't worry, we'll get there. From Adam to Noah. But chapter 6 has this little piece at the beginning before we get into the Noah story. It sort of interrupts. We're left with Noah at the end of chapter 5, and then we get this piece, and then we pick up with Noah again. And it says, and this is the New International Version, I'll read from here. When men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Of course, this contrasts with the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that other figures that we had just seen in chapter 5 tell us, like Methuselah living for 969 years and other figures living 800 and 900 years. And so there's a limit here. Interestingly, in the Garden of Eden, we had the tree of life. And if anyone ate from that, they got immortal life, or at least that's what we're sort of led to believe from the text. This seems to be another way God is concerned that with this sort of stuff that's going on, there might be another way for life to go on way too long for people. So it's one of those strangenesses in there. Then we have this thing in verse 4. It says, the Nephilim were on the earth. And that's a word that is almost untranslatable. There's another book that I've been reading, the Shochan book of the Bible. Let's see if I can hold that up and it will disappear on us again. Yes. I don't know what's up with the video here. Here, I'm holding it this way. There, it didn't disappear. The 5 Books of Moses, done by Everett Fox for the Shochan series. It doesn't use the word Nephilim, it uses the word giants. But my commentary says it's a word that we don't have anywhere else, so we don't really know how quite to translate it. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. These were the heroes of old, men of renown. And it's sort of hard for us to know exactly what that means when it's sort of in 4. Let me read to you what the commentary in the New International Version or New Interpreter's Version says, scholars dispute the identification and the place of Nephilim. Literally, it could be fallen ones. Numbers 13:33 suggests persons of gigantic stature. The first line may be an aside to the reader, giving a contemporary reference, and also afterwards. So whoever was writing it down might be sort of giving the people he was writing for a clue. And this is concerning the offspring of these unions. This interpretation seems more likely than that they were actually the offspring of this union. The later are identified as warriors of renown. Hence, this verse does not present an etiology of any persons known in Israel. But if ancient readers wanted to know what these warriors were, the Nephilim would be a good analogy. So that doesn't really tell us all that much, does it? No, it's one of all of those sort of hard things. But we can see why Everett Fox, in his translation, uses the word giant, since it keys into something else later in the Torah here in Numbers. The first 5 books of the Bible are called the Torah. And in synagogues, you have a Torah scroll, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And hence, again, the Everett Fox book, the first 5 books of Moses, as a set piece here. So once again, this is a strangeness. This is a little bit strange for us to be dealing with here. But the story of Noah and the Great Flood is well known to people, but there are some differences that will poke up, and I'll point out some of those. So I'm going to read a little bit from that, and then I'm going to show you the video that I have on Noah that I found that talks a little bit about some investigations of where this might have happened and what it might be. Some people think that this story is completely mythological or legendary, that it's not a literal occurrence, that it's meant to be something for us to understand more in the way we might understand Jesus' parables than taking it as history. There are others who take a more literalist view of the Bible, who have been searching for Noah's Ark for quite some time. I remember in the 1970s, there was a feature film. I actually went to the cinema and had popcorn and Raisinets and everything, which was a documentary on the search for Noah's Ark. You would never think that that kind of movie would make it in the movie theater, but it was there, and I was intrigued. And of course, today I think back to all of the sort of maybe not quite so good interpretations that were in that documentary, but there are different people who will take it in different ways. So let me read to you sort of the beginnings of the story, at least. I also have some pieces, not quite as many this time, not as many Lego pieces, but I also have some pieces from the Brick Testament that are also showing the Noah story, and I will show you a bit of that as well. It says now, and sometimes I'll use the word Yahweh for God because that's actually how it's being presented again in Everett Fox's translation here. It says, now God saw that great was humankind's evil doing on earth, and every form of their heart's planning was only evil all the day. Then God was sorry that he had made humans on the earth, and it pained his heart. And that's an interesting statement just there, that God was sorry. What would it mean for God to be sorry? What would it mean for God to think this isn't going so well? It's interesting that we're given an insight into God's thought processes and God's emotions with this here. It says, God said, I will blot out humankind whom I have created from the face of the soil, from man to beast to crawling thing and to all the fowl of the heavens, for I am sorry that I made them. But stay tuned. At verse 8, Noah found favor in the eyes of God. These are the beginnings of Noah. Noah was a righteous, wholehearted man in his generation. In accord with God did Noah walk. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth had gone to ruin before God. The earth was filled with wrongdoing. God saw the earth, and here it had gone to ruin, for all flesh had ruined it upon its way. Notice that it said it had gone to ruin before God. God saw it, and it had gone to ruin, for all flesh had ruined it on its way. When you've got a repetition like that, when you've got something like that, it's often indicative, not a guarantee, but it's often indicative that this was once upon a time an orally transmitted story. That people would tell this story from one generation to another, because there are different devices that we use, different memory devices that we use to keep the story intact, to keep an integrity to the story. And there are different ways of doing it. One of the key ways is to rhyme, because if what you're saying rhymes, then you've got the story right. If it stops rhyming, then you've got something wrong there. Another way is with something that's called an acrostic. You can have like the first letter of the line start with A, and then the first letter of the second line start with B, and the first letter of the third line start with C, and you just sort of go down the alphabet. And again, if you're missing part of the alphabet, you're missing part of the story. But frequently we see a repetition. If the same thing is said over and over and over again, you don't need to write that down because you can read it. But if you're telling it out loud, you want to re-emphasize. This is an important point, so I'm going to say that once again. And then I'm going to say it once again, and that's what's happening here. So this is a story that predates the writing of it down. God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me. The earth is filled with wrongdoing through them. Here I am about to bring ruin upon them all along the earth." See there, it's repeated once again. "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. With reeds make the ark, and cover it within and without with a covering of pitch. And this is how you are to make it." So he's giving him specifications of how to make this. This is an ancient enough story that shipbuilding would not have been common. And what we're dealing with in terms of gopher wood and some of the materials, there are educated guesses as to exactly what that is and what that means, because this has been translated and retranslated over time, as well as the fact that what they might call it and what we might call it would be different things along the way. Then it gives us a length and a breadth and a height that says 300 cubits length, 50 cubits breadth, and 30 cubits height. Well, typically a cubit is one of those weird measurements. We typically take it at about 18 inches now, but if you sort of think of a cubit as the distance between your middle finger and your elbow. So guess what? My cubit is probably longer than your cubit. If I'm 6'2", my cubit is going to be longer than someone who is 5'2", generally speaking, because your arms will be proportionately shorter for your body. Mine will be proportionately longer. We don't know how tall Noah was. We think about something like a foot. A foot is 12 inches. Well, my foot may not be 12 inches. Your foot may not be 12 inches. Whose foot was 12 inches? Well, one piece of history says Charlemagne's foot was 12 inches. And the standardization of weights and measures is something that comes along a lot later than Noah as well. So the truth is, we have no real clue as to how big this ark was going to be, except we get the clue when we see how many things need to fit inside of it. It's got to be pretty big. So it says, "A skylight you will make for the ark, finishing it up to a cubit upward. The entrance of the ark you are to make on its side with a lower, a second, and a third deck you are to make it." So this is a pretty big ship, but the typical ocean liner today is going to have a lot more decks and a lot more space. So when we're talking about large, it was large for the time, but not necessarily large for today. It says at verse 17, "As for me, here I am about to bring on the deluge, water upon the earth, to bring ruin upon all flesh that has a rush of life in it. From under the heavens, all that is on the earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. You are to come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And from all living things, from all flesh, you are to bring two from all into the ark to remain alive with you. They are to be male and female each, from fowl of their kind and herd animals after their kind, from all the crawling things of the soil of their kind. Two from all are to come to you to remain alive. As for you, take for yourselves all edible things that are eaten and gather them for you. It shall be for you and for them for eating." Noah did it according to all that God commanded, and so he did. And God said to Noah, "Come, you and all your household, into the ark, for you I have seen as righteous before me in this generation. From all the ritually pure animals, you are to take 7, and each 7, a male and his mate. And from all the animals that are not pure, 2, each a male and his mate." See, now notice this is a little bit different. This is something that we usually don't have in the typical Sunday school rendering. We talk about the animals went on 2 by 2. Guess what? Here we have a variation. We have 7 of the clean animals. This will become important because at the end of the story, we have an animal sacrifice. Well, if you only have 2 and you sacrifice one of them, you're never going to get another one at the end. So they thought of that. They thought ahead in the story. There's also one idea that there are different renderings. There was a recitation of the story over here and a recitation of the story over here. Do we pick one or do we put them both in the story? And it may well be that they put both in the story that was there. It says, also from the fowl of the heavens, 7 and 7 each, male and female, to keep the seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For in yet 7 days I will make it rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and will blot out all existing things that I have made from the face of the soil. Noah did it according to all that God had commanded him. So here we have 40 days and 40 nights. This will be in our Bible here, the first occurrence of a very important number, 40. We have Jesus going into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. We will have the Israelites traversing the great chasm of the desert for 40 years. Now, I've been to that desert. It doesn't take 40 years to cross it. You can cross it very easily in a day. Now, of course, that it helps if you have Israeli tanks and you have Humvees and other kinds of things going across that way. But in fact, it doesn't take that long to go across the Sinai. But that becomes an important period of time and number that's associated with it. And the 40 days and 40 nights of the flood, the 40 days and 40 nights of Jesus wandering, the 40 years in the desert, we see other instances of 40 in the Bible as well. All of those clue back to this, because it's a time of purging. It's a time of purification. It's a time that is important to human beings here and to God. It says, Noah was 600 years old when the deluge occurred, water upon the earth. And Noah came, his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, into the ark before the waters of the deluge. So, of course, this is about the third time we've heard that. Remember, repetition. That's what's happening there. From the pure animals and from the animals that are not pure, and from the fowl and all that crawls on the soil, 2 and 2 each came to Noah into the ark, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. So once again, a repetition. And after 7 days it was that the waters of the deluge were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second new moon, on the 17th day after the new moon on that day, then burst all the well springs of the great ocean, and the sluices of the heavens opened up. The torrent was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So again, how old was Noah? We've heard it now several times, 600 years old. And who was in the ark? We now heard it several times. Noah, his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives. So this is, again, a story that was once upon a time meant to be orally transmitted. I would tell you, you would tell someone else, you would tell someone else in succeeding generations. This was a part of the world that did not have photocopiers, did not have printing presses, did not really have much by way of scrolls and ink, even when they did have writing. And these stories probably predate writing. There are similar stories in many cultures, and in many of those cultures with this story, they largely predate the writing, the ability of writing in those cultures. So it says, on that very day came Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, Noah's sons and Noah's wife and his 3 sons' wives with them into the ark. They and all the wildlife after their kind, all herd animals after their kind, all crawling things that crawl upon the earth after their kind, all fowl after their kind, all chirping things, all winged things. They came to Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 each from all flesh, in which there was the rush of life. And those that came, male and female, from all the flesh they came as God commanded him. Then God closed the door upon him. So once again, repetition. This is just a repetition of what we've seen before with a little bit of variation. I like the all chirping things and all winged things. So that's a new description in there of the same thing that we've been talking about. But it's often seen as significant by many commentators, many theologians, that God closed the door upon him. That it wasn't the people from the inside who were pulling the door closed. It was God in God's own ability and God's own effort in the outside that closes the door upon them. It says the deluge was 40 days upon the earth. Once again, this is how many days? We've heard this multiple times. The waters increased and lifted the ark so that it was raised upon the earth. The waters swelled and increased exceedingly upon the earth so that the ark floated upon the face of the waters. The waters, it swelled exceedingly, yes, exceedingly over the earth, and all high mountains that were under the heavens were covered. 15 cubits upward swelled the waters, and the mountains were covered. So once again, repetition, but we've got this as a deluge. Quite frequently when we see this depicted in movies and other kinds of things, it seems to be a rainstorm. From this translation, as we're reading it, one of the things we might think of, it's not just rain. It's not saying it didn't rain, but it's the well springs come up, and we've got this sloshing across. So there are some scholars who, looking for a historical event that might trigger the memory of something like this, look in that region, in that part of the world, the formation of the Black Sea or the formation of other major bodies of water, especially at the end of the Ice Age when glaciers melted and there were various shiftings around. There was an entire area off the coast of England that submerged, that pretty much extended all the way from England over to the Netherlands and over into Europe, that is completely submerged now. And that was something that we've only begun to rediscover, but it's from the rising levels of the sea. The sea goes up and down. And it is entirely possible that there were some great deluges, not perhaps on a global scale, but on a regionally massive scale. Now, the truth is there's not enough water on the face of the planet or even under the soil of the planet for all of the mountains everywhere on the face of the planet to be completely covered and then some. Just the volume of the water doesn't really work there in that story. But in regional variations, and if all the world to you is the Middle East, then yeah, then it could seem like the world had been completely overcome, had been overturned. It says, then expired all flesh that crawls upon the earth, fowl, herd animals, wildlife, and all swarming things that swarm upon the earth, and all humans, all that had the breath and rush of life in their nostrils. All that were on firm ground died. He blotted out all existing things that were on the face of the soil, from man to beast, to crawling thing and to fowl of the heavens, that they were blotted out from the earth. Noah remained alone, and those who were with him in the ark. The waters swelled upon the earth. And again, see, we're not talking just rainstorm, we're talking about under earth processes here, for 150 days. But God remembered, paid mind, Everett Fox is saying, paid mind to Noah and all the living things and the animals that were with him in the ark. And God brought a rushing wind across the earth so that the waters abated. The well springs of the ocean and the sluices of the heavens were dammed up, and the torrent that from the heavens was held back. The waters returned from upon the earth, continually advancing and returning, and the waters diminished at the end of 150 days. And the ark came to rest on the 7th new moon, on the 17th day after the new moon, upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, the mountains of Ararat are between Turkey and Russia in some of what we sort of call the small republics that are there. So there's Armenia and there's Azerbaijan and there's Georgia, not the state of Georgia. There's a country named Georgia. There's another region called Ossetia, South Ossetia, and other places in that area. Exactly where Ararat is, there's a mountain called Ararat, and then there are the mountains around Ararat. Well, they're not all in one country. We're talking about Armenia, which once upon a time was part of the Soviet Union, and Turkey, which is, I think, still, maybe depends on the day, part of NATO. So traditionally, they were not trusting of each other to go exploring together. So a lot of things that tried to look for Noah's Ark would end up being thwarted quite frequently. But we have the different kinds of stories that are here that are giving us a geographic placement, because remember that Black Sea I mentioned? That's on the eastern edge of the mountains of Ararat, are on the eastern edge of the Black Sea. It says, at the end of 40 days it was, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent out a raven. It went off, going off and returning until the waters were dried up from upon the earth. Then he set out a dove to see whether the waters had subsided from the face of the soil. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him into the ark, for there was water upon the face of all the earth. He then set forth his hand and took her and brought her into the ark. He waited then another 7 days and sent out the dove again from the ark. The dove came back to him in eventime, and here a freshly plucked olive leaf in her branch. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, and she returned to him again no more. So it was in the 601st year, at the beginning of the month, on the first day of the new moon, that the waters left firm ground upon the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and saw, here the face of the soil was firm. So we're still seeing that Noah is acting. Interestingly, God closed them in, but Noah opens them up and opens up the let for them to go. Now the second new moon, on the 27th day after the new moon, the earth was completely dry. And we know not completely dry because we still have oceans and seas and rivers and other kinds of things. So again, we don't want to get too literal with our translations here. God spoke to Noah saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives with you, and all living things that are with you. Interestingly, I always have to sort of stop here. We know Noah's name and we know his sons' names, but it's always, and your wife, and your wife, and your wife. It's like n+1. It's like quite frequently in biblical texts, women are not named. That's something that is a societal issue. That's something that puzzles and bothers me, because these are significant people in their own right. And in a matrilinear, matriarchal society, it's a patriarchal society in terms of organization. It's a matriarchal society in terms of who you come from and whether or not you qualify. To be Jewish today is to be born of a Jewish mother, not of a Jewish father. You can be Jewish from a Jewish father, but you're automatically from a Jewish mother. My mother is Jewish. So according to those rules, I'm Jewish as well. But my children, if I had any children, would not automatically be Jewish because of me. My sister, on the other hand, would continue that line, and her children, according to that rule, are, and then she had 2 daughters, so their children would be as well. It's interesting we don't get the names, even though it's important. But over and over again, we have that. All living things that are with you, all flesh, fowl, animals, and crawling things that crawl upon the earth, have them go out with you, that they may swarm on the earth, and they may bear fruit and become many upon the earth. So Noah went out, his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him. All living things, all crawling things, all fowl, all that crawl upon the earth, according to their clans, they went out of the ark. Noah built an altar. Interestingly, the word that's used, or the phrase that's used here in Everett Fox, is slaughter site to God. He took from all pure animals and all pure fowl and offered up offerings upon the altar. This is important because if you, again, only had two and you started doing that, they're gone. That's it. If you're taking, again, the story literally. Now God smelled the soothing savor, and God said in his heart, I will never curse the soil again on humankind's account, since what the human heart forms is evil from its youth. I will never again strike down all living things as I have done. Never again all the days of the earth shall sowing and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, ever cease. Now God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, bear fruit and be many and fill the earth, or be fruitful and multiply, as we often read in King James versions of the same text. Fear of you, dread of you shall be upon all the wildlife of the earth and upon all the fowl of the heavens, all that crawls on the soil and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. So this is the point at which there's an estrangement. We get the sense, as we're reading perhaps backwards from this story, that in the Garden of Eden, human beings and animals lived in affinity with one another. And there are many who interpret the Noah story as the point at which human beings stopped being vegetarians or vegans. And I know some who have continued a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle, in part because of the idea of the Noah story being the break with what was ideal before then. Now, one of the things that we have is we have a restriction, and this becomes one of the first kosher rules, even before the time of Abraham. It says, all things crawling about that live, for you shall they be, for eating, as with green plants. Now I give to you all. However, flesh with its life, its blood, you are not to eat. However, too, for your blood of your own lives, I will demand satisfaction. From all wild animals, I will demand it. And from humankind, from every man regarding his brother, demand satisfaction for human life. In other words, here's another restriction. Thou shalt not kill. See, we don't have the 10 Commandments yet. We don't have the kosher rules yet. But we're starting to get a little bit of here's how you order society, here's what you need to do. We have a dietary rule and we have a moral ethical rule. Whoever sheds human blood, for that human shall his blood be shed. For in God's image he made humankind. As for you, bear fruit and be many, swarm on the earth and become many on it. And God said to Noah and his sons, as for me, here, I am about to establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with all living beings that are with you, fowl, herd animals, and all the wildlife on earth with you, all those going out of the ark and all the living things of the earth. I will establish my covenant with you. So this isn't just to Noah, and this isn't just to human beings. This is to all life on the planet. This is a covenant that predates Abraham's covenant. This is the covenant that predates Jesus. This is a covenant that God makes with everyone and everything. So my cat is covered on this covenant. Your dog, your horse, the birds of the air, all chirping things and winged things, as it says, are covered here. And it says, I will establish my covenant with you. All flesh shall never be cut off again by waters of the deluge. Never again will there be a deluge to bring the earth to ruin. See, there's that word again, repetition, ruin. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I set between me and you and all living things that are with you for ageless generations. My bow I will set in the clouds, so that it may serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be, when I behold the earth and clouds, and in the clouds the bow is seen, I will call to mind my covenant that is between me and you and all living beings, all flesh. Never again shall the waters become a deluge, to bring all flesh to ruin. See, again, repetition, repetition, repetition. When the bow is in the clouds, I will look at it and call to mind the age-old covenant. That's an interesting phrase because at this point, it's not age-old. It's brand new in the story, but he's looking ahead. There's going to be a time when it is age-old. By the time this got written down, it was age-old. Between God and all living beings, all flesh that is upon the earth, God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." So if it sounds like I'm repeating myself over and over and over and over again, guess what? I am, because that's exactly what the text does. You can actually trim this story down to being only about 1/3 of how long it really is, and not really miss a single detail because of the amount of repetition that's in there. So there are a couple of verses that I skipped as I was reading just for that reason, because I think, the thing that always fascinates me as we're talking about this story is we always have the vision of the animals going 2 by 2, and yet there's that 7 number that's in there. And we don't often think about the animal sacrifices at the end of the journey. That's sort of like, okay, that's not, of course, in a Christian era and in the rabbinic Jewish era, we don't have animal sacrifices. There haven't been for either Christians or Jewish people since the temple was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago. So we don't really relate quite so well to that. At this point, I'm going to pause what I'm saying, and I have a video that's about 3.5 minutes long, so I'm going to put that in here so that you can see that, and then we'll pick up again after that with a couple of questions that the video has. So watch this, and I'll be back.
Noah's Ark is a story that many of us have heard. It details the story of Noah, of whom was given the task of building a massive boat and placing on it examples of the world's animals. The Great Flood is said to have happened. Recent discoveries by underwater archaeologists suggest that this event ended up sinking many cities. One such finding was made off the coast of Turkey, where researchers found traces of ancient civilizations dating back since the time of Noah. One thing that's interesting is many civilizations talk about a great flood, and some of these are even documented. Some scientists don't actually doubt that this happened, but have suggested it may not have been as massive as it's made out. For example, one theory is that the Great Flood could have been the flooding of the Black Sea. It's been put forward that rising water levels happened in this region around 7,000 years ago. When the European glaciers melted, it caused the sea levels to rise significantly. Some have even suggested it overflowed with a force 200 times greater than that of the Niagara Falls. Although scientists think it happened, there are questions about the event itself, suggesting there's no way the world's animals could fit on one boat, with some stating the obvious, such as how would the animals have been on the boat without attacking each other, and how did Noah get the animals on the boat in the first place? Many of us are fascinated by the story of Noah's Ark, with some people even trying to build and replicate the entire thing. The search for Noah's Ark is never ending. Most of the search has been done on Mount Ararat in northeastern Turkey. To understand why Noah's Ark was never found, you need to be aware of the fact the Bible says that Noah's Ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. This happened to be on the 150th day of the flood. Whether Noah's Ark is ever going to be found we don't know, but it's important to mention that Mount Ararat rests upon volcanic strata right on top of sediments, which are said to have been laid down by the flood. Some have said that it's obvious we're never going to find Noah's Ark on this mountain. These same people state it's also very much possible that Noah's Ark will never be found at all. However, some researchers have said they've discovered wood on the Mount Ararat anomaly. They claim that this was part of the original structure, and say that this is proof the story is fact. Chinese and Turkish explorers say they're 99% sure this wood is the real deal. It was discovered by a 15-member team. They then claim that carbon dating proved this wood is over 4,800 years old. Scientists have said, however, that none of this is possible. They say it's not scientifically conceivable that the Ark ended up on top of the 15,000 feet tall Mount Ararat. Quite simply, there's not enough water on Earth to raise water levels that high. And in case you were thinking that plate tectonics raised the mountain's peak since Noah's time, Mount Ararat was just as tall and out of the reach then as it is now.
That has some interesting details in it, some interesting stuff. As they're talking about, as I mentioned before, the glacier idea, that there was a massive deluge that came as the glaciers melted. And we actually can see that happening at different points, not on a global scale and not even as a sort of regionally global scale, but we do see that on a smaller scale, and it makes some sense in some ways that this Noah story could be a historic memory of something that happened like that, which is why many cultures have a story that's like this. Even in the quote-unquote New World, in Native American stories, there are stories of a survivor of a deluge. There are stories in a lot of Middle Eastern cultures of the survival in a deluge. So we have quite a number of things like that. I also want to share with you, as I mentioned before, a couple of the images that are in the Brick Testament. And I can already tell now that we're not going to get to the Tower of Babel today. So we will get to the Tower of Babel next week. But I do want to share just a couple of images because I think they're fun. I won't do quite as much as I did in the last time. But let me figure out here how to share my screen. See, those of you who know me know that I really love Legos, and I would have just been ecstatic and astounded and over the moon if I'd had these kinds of Legos when I was a child and been able to put these together. Here we have a depiction of God walking with Noah. This is the same God figure that was used in the Cain and Abel story and in the Garden of Eden story. And here we have a depiction of Noah building the ark with his sons, and we're going to presume daughters-in-law as well, because there are more than 3 figurines here, unless Noah hired other people to help, which is entirely possible as well. We're not given that level of detail in the story. It's interesting, we're given certain details and we're not given other details. And it's interesting to try to speculate why we have certain details and not other details that are there. Were they lost pieces of information, or were they just not crucial for the story? Here we see the ark sort of growing larger and larger. I love the way the Lego sort of depicts the things, including Lego ladders. I never knew Lego had ladders like that, so I'm impressed. And then the way they have the different animals that are here, and I didn't know Lego had this kind of stuff in terms of animals. So Lego has really improved in the time since I was a child. But here we have a depiction sort of 2 by 2 rather than the 7 and 2 that are here. And here's Noah. Remember, he's getting all of the beasts of the field and the fowl of the air. So here Noah's going after an owl. And here he's scooping up, it looks like some either giant spiders or some other kind of animal. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but you'd think they would need to survive too. And mice and frogs and all sorts of other kinds of things there. So I remember there was a television show called The Vicar of Dibley. Let me stop here so you can see me. There's a television show called The Vicar of Dibley. And there was a massive storm in their church in Dibley in the show. And they needed to repair it. But no one quite knew what the story was. They didn't know what was depicted on the stained glass windows that had been blown out. And they thought it was Jesus feeding the 5,000. But it turned out to be a depiction of Noah's Ark because this is an agricultural community. And one of the residents there said, well, I really don't like Noah. And the vicar of Dibley said, well, why ever not? And he said, well, here's someone who had a chance to get rid of all sorts of things like gnats and mosquitoes. And what did he do? He just took them all with him anyway. So it's sort of interesting, the kinds of interpretations we can bring up for those. But here we see them bringing in the supplies. That's specifically mentioned in the text, that not only are they bringing in the animals, but they're bringing in the supplies. We have our fowl of the air, we have our creepy crawly things, we have our herd animals and other animals all congesting into the ark. Of course, we know today that there are far, far, far more species on Earth than could have fit into even a whole fleet of arks today. But again, the literalism is not the important point. Here we have everyone crowded in. Notice that this is what my closets look like at home, by the way. Everything's crowded in there. And we have Noah and his wife and his sons' wives, whose names we don't know from this portion of the story. And then here we have God outside closing them in. Again, a key point, a crucial point in the story. And here we see, as the story would have us follow, the waters over even the tops of mountains. So this is meant to be a mountain under the sea with the ark way up on the top. Then as the waters recede, the ark sort of lodges onto a mountain. God says, bring everything out. Let them be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Here we have a depiction, which we don't, again, often think about. We don't often reference. We certainly don't share it in like elementary school, Sunday school stories. The altar, the animal sacrifice that's here. Although why they're using a giraffe, I don't know, because that would not have been one of the animals. That would have been one of the 7 clean animals. Here we have God saying, oh, never again will I curse the soil. Never again will I kill every living thing as I have done. And he's giving one of those prohibitions, first, thou shalt not kill. Also, thou shalt not eat flesh with its lifeblood in it still. So that becomes an important rule that continues on. Both of those continue on into the main frame of Judaic practice that's still practiced to this day, both of those. And then here we have the depiction of the rainbow. Whenever I see the bow, I will remember my pact between you and me and every living fleshly creature on the earth. I've always found it fascinating that God needs reminding, that God needs a remembering of things like this. I like the Lego rainbow that's up there. I think that's rather neat. Notice the ark is still on the top of the mountain. We still have the idea in the search for Noah's Ark that it is somewhere in or on top of mountains, in a mountain range. The thing about the mountain range of Ararat is that it is, in fact, near the top of where the Tigris and Euphrates then begin to flow down into what we call the Fertile Crescent, which is where many of the ancient cities, Babylon, Acadia, Ur of the Chaldees, other kinds of cities like that will be found. And that will be where civilization, as we think about it in human terms, begins, at least for our current iteration of who we are. There was an sort of outcropping of civilization around the Chinese rivers. There was an outcropping of civilization around the Indian rivers, and by that I mean in India. And there was an outcropping of civilization around the Nile in that river. But they came later, sometimes hundreds, sometimes maybe even 1,000 years later, than the earliest cities at the Tigris and Euphrates. This is, in terms of continuous development of civilization, where it began, where it started, where city building started, where agriculture really took hold, where writing took place, and where stories such as what we have been reading today were first put down, and they continue with us. So I'm going to pause here because I'm sort of aware of our time, and we'll pick up with the Tower of Babel. What happens after this? There's one little coda, one little piece, so you have to stay tuned for the Noah story. So we're not done with Noah and his children yet. So come back next time for that, and we'll go on from there to the Tower of Babel, and then we'll get introduced to Abraham in our next one, before he becomes Abraham. Again, I would love to visit with you. If you want to have a visit with me, touch base with Melissa and we'll figure out how to make that happen. The easiest way would be to have her send me a message. If you tell her, she can send me a message on Facebook, but she can also give you my phone number and I'll see if I can call you back. But one way or another, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and every other Saturday, I'm happy to come out there. I was just out there today dropping something off and I thought, I really want to visit. So see you next time. You know what? I almost forgot. So don't touch that dial. I got a special guest to come into our class today, virtually speaking, and it's someone that you might remember from television. His name is Jamie Farr, and he played on the television series MASH. And I reached out to him, and he gave me a little bit of a video for you. So I'm going to show that to you today, and it's also going to be on our chapel video tomorrow. But if you stay tuned, as I mentioned you should, you get to see a sneak peek of that right now. Bye-bye.
Hi, Belle Trace Senior Living Community. This is Jamie Farr from the TV series MASH. And I know many of you, the residents, are in seclusion due to the pandemic. So Father Kurt Messick and I thought it might be a nice idea if we had a little chat and maybe if I could cheer you up a little bit. As you know, I played Klinger on MASH and I was always trying to get my Section 8. Well, I finally got my Section 8 and look where I wound up. Same place as you are. I'm at home also. Not quarantined, but at least at home. So if you're in seclusion and you can't be with somebody else, I have a deck of MASH playing cards here. And I could play solitaire, but not like Major Burns. I promise you I wouldn't cheat, okay? Also, maybe a quick story. We used to play a lot of pranks on one another on the show, and Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, was the biggest prankster. So one day, Mike Farrell and Loretta Swit and I decided to pull one on him. There was a scene where Hawkeye's in bed and he gets an alert emergency in the OR that he has to get up and run over to see him. So what we did is he had his combat boots there, and he's going to put on his robe and put his feet in the combat boots. Well, we didn't tell him, but we told the director. We quietly and secretly nailed his combat boots to the floor, so that when Alan is awakened and he knows he has to get to the OR for the emergency, he puts on his robe, he puts his feet into the combat boots, and he can't figure out why he can't put them on. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and it was a good joke, and he took it kindly. So listen, if I could, if you know, I have my fuzzy pink slippers, and I flew over the compound with the hang glider to try to get out, and that didn't work. But you know what? If I could, I'd try to get over to Bloomington, Indiana, and maybe even take Father Messick with me, and we'd fly over you and wish you all a very, very good year. Stay safe, and God love you.